All right, good evening and welcome to the Thursday, December 5th, 2024 board workshop meeting. We rotate locations at this meeting. I remembered to say it at the beginning this time. And we are at Goshen Lane Elementary, which is amazing. Mr. Hetzel, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Coates?
Here.
Mrs. Horn?
Here.
Mrs. Dimmerling?
Here.
Mr. Manley?
Here.
Mrs. Mooring?
Here.
Thank you. And will everyone please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any recommended changes to tonight's agenda? There are none. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Horn. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Mr. Manley. Any discussion? Okay. Mr. Hetzel, please call the roll.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Mrs. Dimmerling?
Yes.
Mr. Manley?
Yes.
Mrs. Mooring?
Yes.
Mrs. Coates?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We will move into special presentations with Dr. Colleen Boyle with the EL and Gifted Learning presentation.
Thank you. Pardon, all of a sudden I started coughing this evening. Well, thank you for having me and for being interested in hearing about our gifted and EL programming. I thought I would start tonight with an overview of gifted education in the district. The first thing we'll talk about is identification. So we'll go on to 2 more slides. Thank you. So just a quick overview of identification in Ohio. So gifted is one of those areas where there's not a federal rule or law about it. There's a federal definition, but all things gifted are managed by the state of Ohio. In Ohio, we are legally required to identify students as gifted in grades K through 12. We are not legally required to serve, but we are legally required to identify. As you can see up there, we have several different areas where students can be identified. That superior cognitive ability is the one that most people typically think of when they think of gifted students. If you were to talk to psychologists or different areas across the country, when they describe a gifted learner, it's probably a student who's got superior cognitive ability. But in Ohio, you can see that students can be identified in a variety of other ways as well. And a student can be identified in one or multiple areas depending on their readiness. Now, we are required to identify using only approved tests based on their validity and reliability. The state of Ohio has an extensive process for reviewing and approving those tests, and they develop a list, and we're told we can choose from that list and that list only. They also set the cut scores, and those cut scores are actually set in Ohio law. They have been in place since the year 2000 and have not changed since, although the tests have certainly changed. In Ohio, we are also required to offer at least 2 opportunities a year for students to be tested. We do have 2 specific windows, a fall window and a spring window. We have freedom to set those dates. We've been monitoring that, and the 2 windows we have really seem to meet our family's needs. We are not pressured or feeling like we can't meet any testing demands with those windows, so we will continue with those. And then we're also required to accommodate whole grade screening. That's where you test every student in a grade level to give everyone an opportunity to possibly be identified. We do that in grades 2 through 8 with the MAP test for both reading and math. The state of Ohio requires it only once in K3 and once in 3 through 6. So we are going above and beyond when we do our MAP testing by giving all of those kids 3 opportunities a year to be possibly identified as gifted. And then for superior cognitive ability, we do that in grades 2 and 5. We actually just finished that about 2 weeks ago, so it happens in November. In the past, we've used a test called COGAT. This year, as part of the work with one of our equity action committees, we've changed that test to the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test. In doing some initial data analysis, we're seeing comparable numbers, but a little bit of a different distribution of identification numbers. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out over the next several years. Okay, and on the next slide, you can see our actual numbers. Now, the numbers you see up here are as of November 1st. They do not include the students who were just tested in grades 2 and 5. You can also see in the graph below our trend line for the last 5 years. It's been pretty consistent. And that number will even itself back out again for this year once we add in our new identified students. You'll see that our science, social studies, and visual performing arts numbers are low. That is common across the state of Ohio. Visual and performing arts typically are low because it's a pretty extensive process to identify students. And when there aren't services attached to it, I think there's maybe one, possibly two districts in the state that offers those services. Usually families and staff don't pursue that very often. We are in the middle of that evaluation process for this year. We've done our first part and we'll partner with the ESC of Central Ohio for the second half. They take some of that burden off of us as a result of our ongoing partnership with them. And then science and social studies numbers are low for us because we actually stopped whole grade screening in those areas a few years ago when we switched from Iowa testing to MAP. Quite honestly, that doesn't concern me. It doesn't do anything to limit opportunities for students that we're not testing those areas. And in my professional opinion, the tests approved by the state for that don't necessarily align with the knowledge or thinking skills that we expect of students. So since it's not denying kids opportunities, I don't think that's an area we need to worry about. In general, our identification rate tends to be a little bit higher than the state average identification rate when are compared to other districts. So.
Can I ask you, and I think we gotta put this at the beginning of these meetings too. Do you want questions as we go or questions at the end?
Why don't we do questions at the end, if that's okay, if you don't mind just jotting them down, and then I'll be happy to answer them all at the end. That's a great question, thank you. So when we look at services, we have a pretty decent service model that spans grades 3 through 12. At the elementary level, the service that most people are familiar with is our GATE model. GATE is a service that's actually led by licensed gifted intervention specialists in a separate classroom. Students have to be identified as gifted in superior cognitive ability to access that service. And then for GATE math, they also have to be identified as gifted in math because each year that they're in GATE math, they actually do 1.5 years of math. So by the time they've done 3 years of GATE math, they've actually done 4.5 years of math instruction. Tier 2 services are for our students who are gifted in either reading or math or only superior cognitive ability. And those occur in their regular classroom through differentiated instruction. We have coaches and provide professional development to those teachers so that they know how to compact curriculum, how to add enrichment. The nice thing about those services is that while it's reported to the state as a service for our gifted kids, any student who shows a readiness for those types of learning tasks can benefit whether they are gifted identified or not. When we get to middle school, we have our ACE program. ACE Math is also a compacted program, and then we have ACE ELA, which is an enriched language arts class. Those are also taught by general education teachers. For ACE ELA 6, students do have to be identified as gifted, but in grades 7 and 8, we automatically place our gifted students into that class. However, any other student who wants to try out that challenge of the class can do so in preparation for approaching challenging classes in high school. For ACE Math, they no longer have to be identified as gifted. We do have placement criteria that looks for elevated math scores, and depending on how elevated their math scores are, they may or may not need an accompanying higher than average cognitive ability score. But we have many students who are not identified as gifted that are able to access that program and have been very successful in doing so. And then finally, at the middle school level, we have partnered with Concord to offer monthly seminars to address social emotional topics specific to gifted students with our middle schoolers. Any gifted identified middle schooler may choose to participate in that monthly seminar. We average about 50 to 60 per building each month. And those lessons have been developed in conjunction with our gifted specialists. When we get to the high school, things change a little bit. Participation in advanced courses at the high school is completely student self-selected. If students are gifted in the area of the course, it counts as a service, but they do not have to be gifted to go into the courses. We report advanced placement and college credit plus courses to the state as a service. We do also offer honors classes, and we encourage our gifted kids to go into those classes, but we are not quite at a point with the professional development requirements to be able to officially report it to the state. The last one I will just mention briefly, and that is academic acceleration. Every once in a while, we encounter students who need significantly more than what can occur in even a gifted classroom. And so we have different types of acceleration where students are holistically evaluated. We look at academic and cognitive functioning along with developmental readiness. And they may skip a single class or a grade level in a single subject or an entire grade level. We have about 800 students or so who have been considered subject accelerated in math. The vast majority of them have done that through our compacted GATE and ACE math classes. But we do have a handful that have had additional subject acceleration in math or another subject area, typically in a lower grade. And then we have between 10 and 20 students in our district who have had some form of whole grade acceleration, either by skipping into a different grade level during their elementary years or starting kindergarten or first grade early. And there you can just see a comparison of our students identified and served. The bulk of our student services occur in grades 3 through 8 with a handful in high school and a smaller handful in K2. That's part of why you see the discrepancy between identification and service. The identification numbers include K-12 and our service numbers only include those grades where we offer services. Our services have been, sorry, I skipped a slide in my own, you're good. You were right, I was wrong, thank you. We are always looking to improve our programming and to improve our outreach to families. So these are just a few of the things that we've been tackling over the last few years, just a few of them, but you can see that work that we are trying to do. In addition, we have had some other outreach programs that we've been trying to do as part of our equity work, which we recapped at that September board meeting. We are seeing positive outcomes as a result, and so when we look at those student outcomes, the state of Ohio holds us accountable as part of the gifted indicator. It is part of the gap closing measure on the district report card, and the gifted indicator is one component of gap closing, but itself has 3 components that make up the gifted indicator. It's all kinds of complex puzzle pieces. The chart on your left is the Gifted Performance Index. That is a calculation of how the students actually perform on state tests. So you can see the light blue line, and I should have made those colors much more different. I didn't, sorry about that. The lighter blue line is the state's requirement. You can see it continues to edge up. And the dark blue line is our requirement. Or is our performance. You can see the last 3 years we have, by the skin of our teeth, just missed meeting that. It's between 0.5% and 1% of the total score required for the last 3 years. On the positive side, we keep raising along with the state expectations, so we're gonna get there. We are going to get there. The second component is the gifted value added or gifted growth. That to me is the most important piece. Are we continuing to move all of our gifted students forward regardless of where they start? I'm really happy to report that we have met that portion of the indicator for the last 3 years. And this year we actually got 5 stars for that component, part of the indicator. So I'm really proud of our team for that. And then the final component is that chart on the left. That's the gifted inputs. That basically looks at what's our percentage of students identified, what's our percentage of students served. You get a complicated array of points based on grade band, the type of identification or service, the racial group, the economic group. And so you can see that that light blue line is the upper one. That's the state's requirement. It continues to escalate each year. We have not met that component yet, but we also continue to escalate. And so we're hoping that some of the different programming efforts that we've made will contribute to that. In terms of district data, students in our gifted services do really well on MAP and other types of district testing. In fact, MAP tends to tell us that about 50 to 60% of students typically meet growth goals on the MAP test. Almost every student in one of our gifted services, we're looking at about 75% of them are meeting those growth goals. So we are far exceeding what NWEA says is typical. And even for 5th grade, which isn't quite at that 75% or higher mark, they still are above the 60% that NWEA says is an optimistic expectation. So we've done the breakdown based on what type of service. They've been very successful, which is a good clue that we need to keep moving forward with what we're doing. I did mention equity efforts earlier. This is a portion of the gifted inputs point of the gifted indicator specific to issues of equity. You can see the charts for identification and service. And the state says you need to have a certain threshold of representation in order to get your points. A perfect score of 1.0 means that our gifted identified population or our gifted served population has the exact same representation of any given group as our district as a whole. So perfect representation is a 1, a 0.8 or 80% is the acceptable level. So the state has set the expectation at 0.8. For our students from racially diverse backgrounds, we are earning partial points on the state report card. We aren't at the expectation, but we are definitely making progress towards that. And then for students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, we still have not met the state expectation for that. This past year was the first year, though, that we did earn partial points in that student group. So again, we're not where we need to be, like every other district in the state of Ohio, but we are making forward progress with that. The other thing I wanted to mention about our equity efforts beyond what we shared in September is that we are piloting a program actually right here at Goshen Lane. It worked out well that this is where we are. It's called the PETS program. It is a talent development program. Talent development programs are one of the strategies that many districts are trying in order to engage students and help build skills that will later show up on gifted testing. So students that maybe didn't have some of the early learning experiences or had different types of learning experiences will get exposed to things in the way that they might show up on gifted assessments later on. So with our particular program, we have one of our gifted specialists working with all of our first and second grade classrooms here at Goshen Lane. Half of the lessons are taught to the whole class. So every child in the classroom benefits from exposure. Additionally, the classroom teacher participates by gathering observations. So it's some job embedded professional development for the teacher on critical and creative thinking skills. And then the other half of the lessons are small group extensions for students who did really well during the whole class lesson. So those groups may change from unit to unit depending on the skill. There's not a lockstep. These students always go in the small group. It really depends on student strength. This year, we're piloting 2 of the 6 units that are part of the program, and then we're going to hope to build on the number of units in future years. We wanted to ease into it since our elementary staff was taking on a lot of new this year. So that's gifted education, and I think it kind of works well that we were talking about equity and bringing in our students at Goshen Lane. Part of the reason we chose this school for talent development is because they have such a large English learner population. They're very racially diverse. They also have a GATE unit. They have a variety of special education units. It was just a nice mix of student population to try and get the biggest bang for our buck with that. And so the English learners are part of that. And so we'll use that as a segue to talk about English learner programs, and then we'll have time for questions when I'm done with that. So while gifted identification is managed by the state, English learner identification is part of federal law. So that is definitely federal government. Our students are identified upon entry into our district using the Ohio English Language Proficiency Screener. I have to remember all of my acronyms. We have quite a few students who come in that English is not their primary language, but I would say more than half of our students that we screen actually have English as their first language, but other languages are spoken in their home. They may or may not be formally taught those by their family, but there's enough exposure to warrant a screening to see if it has impacted their English language development at any point. On the next slide, you can see our current district data. So the graph on the left shows our number of students who have been screened for potential English learner status. It's important to note that the first 3 years on that graph are full year totals, so the entire school year. The number you see there for our current school year is up through the beginning of November. So my anticipation is that by the end of the school year, we will have at least met, more than likely exceeded that number. It's also important to note that that graph does not include any families where parents declined assessment. While we don't have many families who refuse assessment, we do have some. So they are not included. It also doesn't include the large number of students who transfer into us already identified as an English learner by another Ohio district. We don't rescreen them, so they aren't in that number. Now, the number on, or the graph on your right is our number of actual English learners enrolled in the district. Again, this does not include any students who used to be English learners and have tested out. It's only those who are currently identified as an English learner. Again, the first 3 years are the peak number for that year. What you are seeing for 24-25 was as of 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Yes. If you compare where we are today to exactly 1 year ago today, we are between a 16 and 17% increase in our numbers. And it is only December 5th. And they keep coming. You can go ahead and, if you are a numbers person, there are actual numbers. You can see that we have more than doubled our number of English learners today compared to the end of the 2017-18 school year. Now, if you really want your mind blown, take a look at what this looks like compared to the state. So this shows the percentage of growth in our EL population over time. Let's start with the two jagged lines. The green jagged line is the year-to-year continual growth in the state of Ohio. The number you see for 24-25 is ODEW's projection based on what they've seen in trends across the state. The blue line is ours. And again, all of those numbers, except for this year, are as of the end of that school year. And that's where we are today, with a half year. The straight lines are the beginning to end increase, with just a straight 2017 to 2024 comparison. The red line is the state of Ohio, the yellow line is us. Now, I will say we are pretty similar to other central Ohio districts, but when you look at the state as a whole, we are by far outpacing the state of Ohio for English learner population growth. Our English learners come from a wide array of backgrounds and languages. More than 55 languages are spoken by families in our district. Our most popular languages are Spanish, Somali, Nepali, and French Creole. Other languages that you will commonly hear include Aramaic, Urdu, and Twi. So our service model is a little bit more fluid than what we have in Gifted Ed. Gifted Ed, there's very clear, if you have this criteria, you go into this specific service. Our EL services are more fluid because language development is fluid. And so kids may come to us needing something more intense, but partway through the year, we can back off a little bit. So we currently have 16 EL specialists in our district, along with the support of 5 alternative instructors in our programming. We offer services in all of our buildings except for Middle School East because of their smaller population over there. However, students who are living in that area have the option to enroll in Middle School West for services, and we provide transportation for that. Services are primarily occurring in an inclusion type of environment within English language arts classrooms. You will find in any of our ELA classrooms, my specialists will come in and out on a regular basis. At the high school, we do offer a separate beginner ELA class that is taught by one of my EL specialists who's dually licensed as an ELA teacher, and the hope is to help those early English learners prepare to enter an English 9 class. We do also offer small group and individual pull-out session students, particularly our newcomers that maybe have no English background at all, may meet with my specialist or an AI for small intensive groups. And then at the high school, they have a workshop option where it's an elective course. It's just more targeted language instruction in those beginning and intermediate years. So for student outcomes, these are a little trickier to measure because what we would expect for students who are brand new to the country is going to be different than what we would expect for students who've been with us for a few years or who were born in the US but just have multiple languages spoken at home. So I'm going to focus primarily on growth on the Ohio English Language Proficiency Assessment. That is the test that we are required to administer every year to all of our English learners to measure their English proficiency. It usually is administered February, March timeframe. On this left side, you can see our exit rate. It has hovered between 15 to 19% every year. That means that our tested students test high enough on that test to exit their status as an English learner. The state average is 11%, so our exit rate is a little bit higher. It is going to fluctuate as our population fluctuates. This year, we have a greater percentage of students coming from out of the country than we have had in prior years. I would anticipate that number is going to go down a little bit. It's just going to take them a little bit longer. You can see on the right side a graph of state growth. So the state of Ohio holds us accountable to English learners making growth. They only count students who have had at least 2 OALPA tests. They compare the first one to the second one, and they, depending on the student's age and a few other factors, they say they have to have increased this many points, and then we get credit for students meeting that goal or exiting out of the program. The light blue line, the one that dips down and then starts to come back up, is the state's requirement. The reason you see that big dip in 2021 is they changed how they reported that factor on the report card.
It does.
The dark blue line that goes up above it is us. And again, you're gonna see some of those fluctuations as our population changes. So I'm really pleased that our team is growing our English learners. They're building that language proficiency. Most kids are out within 5 years, which is what you would expect. The average actually for our Gahanna student population is 2 years in our program. Students that come to us at a younger age and enter earlier, exit earlier, the highest rate of exit is grades 1 through 4. They come to us a little bit later, they tend to stay a little longer, but our team does a great job getting them there. I don't have data for OST or MAP. As you might expect, our English learners do score lower on those tests than our district average. However, I am excited because once they exit EL status, they actually tend to score on average with the district. So they catch up very quickly. Like Gifted, we have had a lot of ongoing initiatives in the last few years. Our biggest focus has been increasing access primarily with our families. So you can see a whole lengthy list of things that we've been working on. All but the last one are really focused on connecting with families, helping families understand what's happening in our schools, helping them know what their kids are learning, everything from translations of dyslexia videos and Pocket Talks, which we highlighted at our September meeting. The last item on that list is called the critical data matrix process. That actually is a process of looking at individual student data to help discern when a student struggles are due to English language acquisition as opposed to a potential disability. We've brought that on, we've trained all of our EL specialists and all of our school psychologists and are starting to see it used more to help reverse some of the issues we've had with our EL students being over-identified as having a disability mistakenly due to language acquisition. So I'm really excited about that. So lots going on in our world here. I'm happy to answer any questions though that you might have.
I know I have a couple, but I'll let my board colleagues go first.
Megan was ready.
Was I ready? You might have answered as I went through. I guess I was way back up in Gifted.
Okay.
So when we're looking at, I guess what is slide 4, that, I'll wait for it. I'll figure out my question along the way. And then you're at the end to be ready.
Is it this one?
Yeah, that 1,400 kids, that is our current number in the district K through 12.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Yep.
And so once they're identified that superior cog or even like critical thinking, like they are that all the way through, is that correct?
That is
So they
correct. Once a
exit-
student's identified as gifted, they remain identified regardless of any future testing. It's our job to keep them performing at that level.
Okay, and then what do you feel like would be an example of like a tier 2 service for kids who are like in 4th or 5th grade, they didn't hit superior cog, but you know, they're that reading or math?
So in reading, it may be things like higher level text during book clubs, or maybe it's a different vocabulary list. For math, it may be things like them testing out of certain lessons in their unit, but not necessarily the whole unit. They can have strengths with certain skills but still need instruction in other skills, so they might get in extension activities. We also provide our staff with access to a variety of complex problems that incorporate higher thinking. Honestly, one of the biggest things that our teachers do is something that families unfortunately never see, and that's higher level questioning. We spend a lot of time working with our teachers to help them understand how to craft a question that elicits more abstract reasoning or pushes students to extend their thinking during conversations in number corner or during conversations during wit and wisdom or class discussion. So those are just a handful of things. Lots of possible strategies. Those are probably the most commonly used.
Okay, I think that makes sense to me, and I don't know where I wanna go with my next question / statement, because I don't wanna put anything else on anybody else, but I guess having my own kiddos who fall kind of in that not superior cog, but in that reading math area, I do think, listening to you, I'm like, oh, they did those things. But I'm not sure that I ever realized that that's why they were doing those. So when I think about like when we're communicating with families, I hate to put that on teachers. That's where it's like, I don't know where I want to go with this, but like somehow and I know we get newsletters, I get newsletters, things like that. So I don't know what the right answer is, but somehow like communicating, because you're looking at about, when we were looking at 5:59 to 9:10, my math's not amazing, but that's like 350 or so kids-ish. That's a lot of families that we communicating that we're doing something. Did you know we're doing something?
I appreciate that feedback. We'll definitely honor
Because I
how
was like,
we-
oh yeah, they did those things. I guess I didn't realize that was why, so.
Thank you. Teacher conference, would that be the?
That's a great place to do
I'm
that.
sure there's many ways to put, like, places to put that, like I said, I know I got newsletters, I am sure things were said that it just didn't connect the dots for whatever reason, and it's one of those things like, do we over communicate, do we under communicate, what do we do, but. So I don't know,
But
like
I am
said,
happy to
I
hear
didn't
you
know.
confirm that yes, your kids experience
Yeah,
that. Because
exactly.
I can say this is what we're doing, but to hear that, oh no, it actually is happening, that's always great confirmations.
Yes, so thank you.
Yeah, I kind of had questions about that too, so that really helped decipher like what brings them into tier 2 and how that works, so thanks for that. And just, it's just refreshing the early intervention, and I'm just constantly so inspired and uplifted by all the work you do. My question, going back to page 19 about the enrollment, I was just looking at the trends you mentioned, and I did the numbers before I saw that you quantified them at the next page, and by looking at your graphs, they're so accurate. It looks like there's a jump like about 50 each time, and the reasons for that, like it made me think of the families and testimonies that I've heard, like we are well known for our special needs programming, and the families that told me they moved here for just that because of the programming staff and culture, and I wonder what you all attribute it to, and is that typical of our neighboring districts? But a lot of our just great programming speaks for itself, and talking about the stats at Goshen as well as an example, but I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
So we've seen an increase this year from students out of country and then students from neighboring Ohio districts. And I do think part of that is word of mouth. I actually met with one of our community partners today and was talking through some of the programs they offer. And one of the things they shared with me is that, and this would only apply to a small percentage of our population, but when families come to the United States through either the refugee or asylum seeking program, they are often told where they are going to go. They are given a contact to help them establish housing, and so their first priority is find a place to live, get a job, become financially secure. So they have no choices at that point. Once they've gotten a little bit of stability, then they start to consider, where's the best place to go for my family and my child? And so then they start to move around the region where they're initially placed, looking for those communities. And so the partners that I spoke with today said that actually what we are witnessing are those families now having gotten settled, and then word of mouth is, well, if you go to Gahanna Jefferson schools, you'll get this sort of treatment, and they're starting to come. And We are getting them from public schools, we're getting them from charter schools. It had a huge jump this year in the number of students coming from charter schools, meaning they lived in another community, moved here, and now have left that charter school. So I think the type of programming we can offer here holistically absolutely plays a part in that.
That's really good to hear. I have heard families talk to me about being recruited and approached and the outreach that was done to them to go to certain charter schools, and once they were there, it didn't really pan out like was pictured. And so that's really good to hear. I mean, keep it up, it's great. Thank you. Some of the numbers too, an afterthought, I always have one, is we know the growth and the numbers that's coming to Ohio. And the reason I asked about neighboring districts, I'm just always so proud to talk about the work that you all are doing and we're doing, and it's great to be a part of it. So, did you answer my question about the neighboring districts? Is that a common trend with?
The moving around is definitely a common trend that they are seeing. What we
They're
do have
seeing
different
growth
are
as
the
well.
specific populations. There are some populations that are kind of universal to Central Ohio, but then there are other populations that are a little more niche. We have a little bit larger Nepali population than some of our neighboring districts. However, other districts are getting more Haitian families than what we have received. So those are just some very specific examples. There's all kinds of nuances like that. A lot of that has to do with connections.
Sure.
Who do they have from
Yeah.
their prior lives that are somehow connect to them here, and that will drive them. The other thing that starts to happen with a couple of our communities are secondary settlements. So they may have even come to a different state, and then they come to join us here because their family members were settled here while they were settled in another state. So we're starting to see some of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have two questions, and the served versus identified slide, I think it's number 8, on the gifted. I think I missed this. Did you say that there's a discrepancy because of high school?
High school and primary. So the identified numbers are K-12. Served numbers will only include students grades 3 through 8, and then mostly 11 and 12, because our 9th and 10th graders are typically in honors classes, and those don't count as services to the
Okay.
state.
So, but we're still doing WEPs for high school students now,
If they are in an AP class.
if in the 8, okay.
I hope one day we can get to the other, but there's a lot of PD that our teachers have needed for different reasons, so we slide in the gifted PD where we can, and we'll get to a point where we can count honors courses eventually.
Would that include then the tier 2 kids and the reading and math?
Yes.
And then my second question is, with the number of gifted students, why do you think we don't have more National Merit Scholars?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that one.
Is the application process extensive?
It's typically just based on PSAT score. Now,
Everybody takes it.
Yeah.
everybody takes it, so everyone has an opportunity. It may have to do more with the criteria or the cut score. I think that
We
changes
have to
year
look
to year.
into that a little bit more, dig into that to see.
Good question.
It's a great question we haven't explored yet, so we'll definitely dig into that.
I think, I was just gonna say, if we're digging into that, it'd be interesting to look at us in comparison to some other central Ohio schools too. Like, do our numbers match with that, or they, you know what I'm saying, like, is it a weird cutoff score, is it something different from us, like, cause it's a long test, and it's a lot. If that's what I'm looking at, yeah.
And it's not as deep. Typically, these kids wanna dive in and be deeper in it, but that's my assumption. I just was curious if it had any validity.
That's a great question.
That's all my questions.
I just had one quick one. So for EL, you said there's EL staff in every building except E's. On the gifted side, do we have gifted in each of the buildings?
So gifted services are offered in all of our buildings. We have gifted specialists this year currently at High Point, Goshen Lane, and Lincoln. Next year, it will be at Goshen Lane and High Point. We used to have
Right.
different grade level of classes at different buildings,
Right.
which was nice in that it put a little bit of gifted at every building, but it was difficult for our families because they
Right.
might have one student who had to go to one building and a different child had to go to a different building. So by consolidating and eventually matriculating all of those classes to just two, it allows us to make more effective use of our staff, first of all, and then families don't have to choose. If they have a child who's eligible for gifted services and then another child who's not, either due to age or identification status, they can apply for an intra-district transfer. And unless there's a significant space issue, those transfers typically are approved year to year.
Thank you.
The goal is to not split families.
Right.
Just two questions. I love that you partner with Concord for the gifted students, but for the, are we looking at a possible partnership for EL learners too?
That actually was my conversation today. So it's not with Concord, but it's with another community partner. And so we just started exploring options today. We haven't even, really haven't discussed it with anyone other than Tia and I, just because we are at the very earliest stages of looking at what are our options to support those families. So
Okay,
we just
glad
have
to
to
hear
do it a
you're
little
exploring it.
differently because of cultural approaches to family needs. And so the community partner I spoke with today specializes in working with immigrant families.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That is great.
And then my last question is just how, as a board, how can we best support you?
Well, first of all, just allowing me to come speak to you about these two populations. It is very rare in all my years as an educator that I have been invited just to give information. So thank you for being interested and asking the questions. That to me is the biggest thing because you all are really good at identifying what the needs are as you hear the information. So just please keep talking with me and keep asking for the information, and I appreciate the action that you're willing to take as a result.
Well, it's an excellent presentation. Thank
One
you.
last question. How many districts actually provide services to gifted students in Ohio?
Most districts provide some sort of service in some manner. Because there are so many different types of services, and because districts can choose grade levels and the areas of focus, it's really hard to compare. Like even if I pull up our comparison data from the state report card, some districts only do inclusion-based services, some only do gifted pull-out services with the GIS, and then you have everything in between. So everybody seems to offer a little something.
Too many flavors.
There's,
Okay.
yes, I think Baskin Robbins, was it 101?
Yeah.
That about sums it up.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask you one more question that I've been asking? And now that you were like asking, I was like, wait, I've actually been asked this by people in the community. Can you explain why we have chosen Goshen and High Point as the locations for our gate schools? I did hear you say Lincoln, but that's not next year.
Right.
And then kind of the second part of that question is, like, why then would one kid go to Goshen or like High Point? Like, as in like, they just closer, like geographically to that school and that's why they get bused there?
It was a mix of factors. We took a look at, and no single one determined it. It was a combination. Where were our numbers distributed across the buildings? What transportation routes were already in place or would be the least disruptive to our transportation system as a whole? And then who had space? That was another part of it. For example, Lincoln's nice and centrally located, but they're busting at the seams in some ways. So that's part of why it's being phased out of Lincoln and into Goshen and High Point. So it was that combination of factors. We wanted to make sure nobody had to drive from one end of the district to another to get to gifted services. And so it is determined geographically just for the ease of transportation.
And we have the programming on both sides of town.
Right.
So that balances it out as well.
And we worked really hard to ensure that how the program is being implemented in both of those buildings is exactly the same. We've streamlined our ELA curriculum for the GATE ELA classes this year. The GATE math has always been consistent, but this year we spent a lot of time working on our GATE ELA curriculum to make sure that it looked the same in both buildings so that regardless of which one you attended, you would get the same experience. And then those tier 2 services that are offered in all our buildings. So that way we would have a mass shuffling of families everywhere if we localized those.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Boyd.
Thank you very much.
Our next presentation is Ms. Tia Holliday with the course handbook.
Good evening, everyone. So I am here to present the updates for the GLHS Program of Studies for the 25-26 school year. It always is interesting because in order to be able to present at the December workshop, we have to start planning for it in October, November, like in those areas. And it's like it feels like we just started school and then we're talking about the next school year. But we get it done. And so I'm here to share with you some of the updates. We actually don't have as many updates to this year's program of studies as we had last year, but I do want to go through a few of them with you. Starting with the cover design. As you know, every year we elicit a design from the students in the SWAG program. And so this year's cover was designed by Corinne Perkins, who goes by Solo. She's a 12th grader in the SWAG program, and hers was chosen. It is now become a thing. Like when I reach out to Mrs. Lawson, she's like, already got it, and here are some options. So it's now just become the thing that we do, and it's really exciting to have our students have their artwork showcased on our program of studies every year. It looks like, so one thing to note that is slightly different here in the actual program of studies, the student's name will be in the corner. I noticed that it's missing on this picture, but it will be in the corner so that we recognize them on the program of studies. We do that every year. So then next, just a couple of updates to the course offerings that we have. Really the biggest updates came from just two of our departments this year, starting with English. And if you remember from last year, the English department, they also had the most courses that got changed. There was some conversation about being able to provide options for students to have more choice in their selection for their English credit. And so what they had decided to do and had asked was to replace 3 of their full year English 12 courses that we offered with semester-based courses that students then would be able to choose, and they would have the choice. And there were 4 courses that they added last year. They would have the choice to pick 2 of the 4 to get their last credit for English. We did maintain Senior Lit and Comp last year as a full year course, just for an option for students if they wanted to choose it. There was a lot of success with the semester courses this year, and so as a department with students, they decided to take the Senior Lit and Composition course, and split it into 2 semester courses that now adds 2 additional semester options for students to choose from, and those being a research capstone and a memoir course. And so now they're up to 6 semester-based courses that students can choose from to get their last credit for English. And again, it just leads more into the choice and interest base for students for that final credit for English. And so those were the 2 new courses that we added. And then also within the English department, we just had some general updates. The Intro to Broadcast Journalism course had a name change, and really that was just to align with the rest of the courses that are in that scope and sequence. It previously went from Intro to Broadcast Journalism to Journalism 2 and Journalism 3. And so to just make it flow a little bit better, it became Broadcast Journalism 1. And then the sports broadcasting class has changed. Previously, it was a 9 through 12 option. It has been changed to a 10 through 12 for 2 reasons. One, capacity. He said last year they had roughly 80 students who had requested the course, but we only have space for 48. And also typically, in order to get to sports broadcasting, you need to have completed speech and broadcasting 1, which would be your freshman year completion. So it's typically sophomores that get into it anyway. So we just made that adjustment to kind of help ease that. But definitely a lot of interest in that course, obviously. And then the Afro Heritage course was one of the semester courses that was added last year. Just had its course description that's in the program of studies updated a bit, just to be more in line with how the course was developed for this year. Again, it was a new one, so she just kind of refined the description a little bit, but no change in the actual content. The next updates come within the math department. And this, again, was just a shift to be more accurate with what we were providing for students. No new courses here, but previously we offered 2 courses that were put into the schedule for students who might need additional support in their math classes. So they would take this along with their math class. And that was the Intensive Math Strategies course and Intensive Geometry Strategies course. But really what was happening is it was math intervention, and it was intended to be supplemental support for those students that needed additional math support. So we just changed the names to Math Intervention 1 and Math Intervention 2. Typically Math Intervention 1 is students who are taking Algebra 1, and so it's intended to support those skills. And then Math Intervention 2 is intended to support students in geometry. I do want to note that while they are listed in the program of studies, these are not classes that kids can select when they're doing their request. It is based on math data, OST data, building team decision to say that these students need additional math support. And there's a lot of conversation with previous teachers and looking at the data to make that determination.
And they get a credit for it?
They do get partial credit for it, yes.
Are those semester, I'm sorry, are these specifically?
Yes, it's it is fine for questions throughout. Those are, right now they're built into the schedule. It's full year, but, and they do get partial credit for it. We're also looking to see like the best way, because as a part of the MTSS process, how do we make a space for students to be able to receive the intervention that they might need? While also, if we notice that students are able to close some gaps and they don't need that intervention anymore, how do we cycle them out for other students to be able to come in when needed based on the data that we have? So we're still working through that process, but right now it is set up as a year-long course for partial credit. The next greatest change, it was within the special education department. And again, a lot of these updates that were made this year were to be more in line with meeting the needs of the students based on what the trends that we were seeing. So the first one, we used to offer a course called Algebra Prep Skills. It was a one-year credit course for our students and it typically focused on pre-algebra skills. So it's our students with IEPs that likely have math goals that are not quite ready to take an Algebra 1 course, and they could use some more of those foundational skills. They would have that course to be able to take. I think with some of the shifts in just looking at our data and seeing we have a greater need for students who are able to access Algebra 1 with additional supports built into the classroom. And so the department has decided to remove the Algebra Prep Skills course and replace it with an Algebra 1 skills course. So the students are getting their Algebra 1 credit, whereas before they were taking Algebra Prep Skills and then they would take Algebra 1. Now they can take Algebra 1, but the remediation and the foundational skills they will be built within that course, and they will still be able to assess and be on track with the rest of the freshman class typically. Also adding a geometry skills course with the same intention. Students are able to access the geometry content and standards with the additional support built into the course. And they're typically then able to take it 9th and 10th grade versus 10th and 11th grade. They already have an Algebra 2 skills course, and that has been in the books. And again, it's the same situation where students are accessing an Algebra 2 content with the additional support built in. And what's
the distribution, do you think, of students that will be, that will take one class versus the other? Like as far as what the offering's gonna be?
Yes, that is a great question that I don't have the answer to. I'm not sure if you.
I do. So if we look at the number of students who take the math skills class right now, it's less than 20. It's usually one course offering per level. The other students who also may be students with disabilities would be in traditional math classes with an intervention specialist that does some collaborative teaching.
Got it.
So these students are having a more intensive math specific learning disability that need remediation as well as support in content.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And in addition to that, our students with IEPs who have the additional support, they also get scheduled into what we call assist periods. And that again is where usually their specially designed instruction is provided, and they get additional assistance on top of either the course that they're in or the inclusion setting. And so again, just to be able to meet the needs of the students as well as work within the schedule and provide more opportunities for students, there are going to be 2 additional assist classes that are added to the options for students. One is an ELA Math Assist combination. Currently, if we have students who need both ELA support and math support, they're scheduled into 2 different assist periods, which then takes up a course space in their class, and so they can't choose to take an elective, whereas a combination assist would allow them a space to take another course that they might be interested in. And then an executive functioning assist period is also going to be added, and that's for the students who may have some academic needs, but more of their needs are in the area of executive functioning, and so they could have some more targeted support there, whereas right now we only have the math and the ELA assist, so their primary goal is working with content first.
And so, on the previous slide, students were placed in those classes, not necessarily choosing them.
And this would be the
Same.
same, yes, and this would be based on the IEP team and based on the students' needs. So there would be a lot of discussion with the students, the families, the staff to be able to determine what's the best course for those students.
Because everybody in that class is on an IEP.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So I love this. Before you go forward, I think this is great. I think it's super important, especially at the high school level, that they're in a class that's appropriately paced for them. And we find sometimes when that regular classroom, even with the intervention specialist, that the pace of the class is just moving so fast that even with the modifications, the content is, just moving too fast and above their head. So I think these classes are great because it allows you, like you said, to teach the content but at an appropriate pace, which is then where I think you see more growth. I also love the fact that we are able to provide credit for the ELA assistance and the executive functioning classes too, because I don't love it when they're sitting in anything they don't get credit for. That's why I keep asking that over and over again.
Yes.
That is probably my least favorite thing ever, so
Yes.
I love that we're able to do that too.
Yes, and I don't think kids like that either.
It doesn't really go well, nobody tries really hard, it's not a thing, so.
Yes. Okay, the next few slides are just, again, describing some of the course description updates. And I do want to say that when I say course description updates, it could be as small as the grammatical changes that needed to be caught, a sentence added or a sentence removed, or like a full revamp to better align with what the course is. And so it's a mix with all of these, but I did want to point out which courses had updates to their descriptions. So within the business department, we have the entrepreneurship course, which is a semester course we offer, and then the Global Scholars Program. It actually was updated by the World Council, and so just making sure that our language aligns with their language. Within the science department, AP Environmental, AP Chemistry, CCP Elementary Chemistry, and Microbiology, again, had tweaks that ranged within their updates. Within Visual and Performing Arts, we had updates to Painting 1 and Painting 2, and updates to Color Guard. And then in Physical Education and Health Department, we had updates to Lifetime Sports and Activities, Lifetime Fitness and Health. And then lastly, we did add, so several of our courses do list prerequisites for the course for a variety of different reasons. It might be, like I mentioned, with sports broadcasting, where you need the intro class before you take the other class, or you'll be more successful if you get a certain grade in this, or if there's teacher recommendation, things like that. One of the things, though, that we are constantly checking to make sure is, because we tout how robust our program of studies is, we also understand there are some classes that seem to be unattainable for some of our students, and we're trying to make sure that we're not adding more barriers to the programs and the classes that we offer. So there was new language that was added to just kind of point out that yes, there are prerequisites for several of the programs and the courses that we offer, and there's a lot of consideration that goes into those programs, those prerequisites. Also, though, building administration has the ability to override, and they may override a prerequisite depending on information that they have about a student's circumstance or their previous learning experience that may say that they could access the content or the program that is in there. So we've added that language in there so that it's just clear for people to know that.
I like that flexibility.
Yeah, because we don't want to unintentionally cause barriers for students. We also want to make sure that students are going to be successful in the programs and the classes that they choose to take it. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say it's nice having that in print. Word of mouth, it carried to our family because Lila grew up signing before she started speaking for sign language.
Yeah.
And so they told her, yeah, you will start at such and such a level. But it's great to have it in writing so that it doesn't just depend on word of mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Other questions?
That's
Thank you.
Continue to be proud of all the offerings we have.
Right.
I feel like like speaking for my two, have been super successful in college because of the robust diversity that they had and were able to explore interests while also being challenged. And I hear that a lot from families too. So just great job.
I just want to mention also, there have been some pains with past cuts to the program. And so I'm not really feeling the pains of cuts and losses and just continual growth. Refinement.
I'm gonna assume you're not going over the 106-page handbook, right? But can I ask you two questions
Yes.
as we were like exploring in the high school?
Absolutely.
You know, we're on, where it says mandatory electives, it gives like a 0.5 for speech.
Yes.
Is that speech or intro to theater?
So for us, we count speech, intro to theater, and intro to rhetorical debate. Those are the three options that students can use to meet their speech requirement, and they're all half credit.
Okay, maybe that's something we could add there. We had a moment of panic,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, did you sign up for the one run?
Yes.
And then the other question I had was, it looks like we don't offer government until 12th grade.
Correct.
Is that correct? Is
That
there
is
a
correct.
reason we don't allow them to take it as 11th graders?
So we had this discussion actually back, it probably would have been 2015, 2016, around the time when the state tests had been updated and we needed the points for it. One of the things that we talked about though, and the reason why we decided to keep government as a 12th grade course is again, the relevancy of it and the connections, especially as students begin to become of age to be able to register to vote. And they actually have space where they might be, volunteering with the election. They help them to see where they can register and all of those things. So it was more about the relevancy of the content versus pushing it up for a test piece. We were fortunate in that at the time that the state test was being developed, one of our social studies teachers was actually on the state team to help with that. And so he was able to bring us some information that just in the way the organization of the government course was, that we were able to kind of redesign the sequence of the content so that our students are able to sit for the government test in the fall. And then, because most of the content that is tested is a semester, like actually the state requirement for government is just a half a credit. And so we were able to redesign it so that sequence they could get through the content that's being tested in that fall semester so that they're prepared to be able to sit, and they're actually doing that this week. And then the second half, they focus more on like state and local and things like that aren't as heavily tested, but it still keeps it relevant for students as a 12th grader.
How many students take government as CCP through Columbus State or another?
Yeah, that is a number that I don't have off the top of my head, but I want to say that we have, from the last time I remember, it was roughly about 400 students that take government with us. So, and the other thing that we have to think is, so students can earn their government credit through the typical American government class that we offer. They can also get it through AP government. And so students that do AP government do not have to sit for the state test. The AP test is a substitute for that. We have students who do CCP, Intro to Government, Poli-Sci 1100 or Poli-Sci 1250, which is their state and local. And then we do have, and then a handful of other universities. And then we do still have students who are doing government through TRECA. And so I'd have to get the exact number, but
Neither of my kids took it through Gahanna.
yeah, I'd have to get the exact number.
Yeah.
But it's still majority of our students are taking it, but we definitely see a shift in the other ways, the other options that they can take it.
But if they take it another way, they don't have to wait till senior year, right?
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Is that
Yes.
kind of why you think your kids did that?
yes, because they didn't want to give up a whole period. They had science.
Yeah, I guess that was
they
my thought,
wanted
with it
to
just
take.
sitting in that 12th grade, is that it being your required class, being forced to be taking at the end. I don't know.
But they're also required to do English and math in their
Yeah,
senior
yeah.
year too.
They are, they are.
But yes, they can. If they are not taking just the typical American government or AP government with us, then there are other times of the years that they can take them.
Thanks, Ms. Hoffman.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will move to our director reports and discussions. And first is Mr. Starkey with communications.
Good evening, Madam President and members of the board. Happy to be here tonight. So if you haven't found out yet, I love to look at our data. I love to put together our spreadsheets and just see what's happening in terms of our communication efforts. So tonight I wanted to take us through briefly through my most recent data dive in what we're actually doing tonight in live streaming our board meetings. So I did this last winter time as well, so I wanted to just provide a snapshot of 2024. I know we're already in the 12th month. So I want to set the stage for tonight's data set. So it was from January to the end of November. Obviously this is our first meeting in December and I couldn't include these numbers in the data set, but I'll be sure to add them once we get them completed. So we had 42 meetings on our YouTube channel, and that's broken down between regular meetings, workshops, special meetings, and finance and facilities committee meetings. One of those only had 6 views. It was 5 minutes long. It was a summer special meeting. That's not included in my data set. There's another sort of outlier that I did include, our February finance and facilities meeting. I think my internet had a millisecond glitch, cut the stream, so I actually had 2 streams for the meeting. And I went and reposted the entire recording. So it's a little strange, but I just counted the numbers from the recording, not either of the halves of the live stream. So now the stage is set for the numbers. Total from January to November's meetings, they were viewed, that's live and playbacks, a total of 2,636 times. And if you average that amongst the 41 meetings, that's approximately 64 views per meeting. And people watch an average of 7 minutes and 31 seconds per meeting, or 12.44% of the total time, right? Because some of our meetings are shorter than others. And so it averages out to 12.44% of each meeting that they're watching. If you look at our live stream numbers, so people that are on right now, we average approximately 2.5 viewers live during the meeting. Our peak is about 4.5. But when you compare those to total playbacks, we know that people are going back and looking at the meetings. They just aren't spending their Thursday evenings with us.
A real quick question.
Yes.
On the 64 per meeting, is that unique views?
Yes. So then I wanted to dive a little deeper and break it down into different meeting types. So I already mentioned our 4 meeting types: regular, workshop, special, and finance and facilities. And we had some special meetings tacked on to either workshops or finance and facilities. I lumped the special meetings that were tagged on as what the original meeting was for. So for some more numbers, our regular board meetings led the way in terms of average viewership at 102 views per meeting, and an average watch duration of 12.3%, so it's just below our average, just barely. And I'm sorry, Cliff and Kevin, but our finance and facilities meetings had the lowest viewership on average, but the caveat there is it had the highest view percentage for the duration. So it had the lowest, so it had the lowest number of views, but people stayed for the content once they got to the video. And our workshops like tonight averaged 71 views with an 8.6% average view duration. So when I look at those numbers, to sort of contextualize them, they don't necessarily surprise me. When I look at our regular board meetings, that's where we have a lot of our celebrations, our recognitions. And so I see it making logical sense that people's families that may not be in attendance are watching those or going back to look at them. It's also where board action is taken predominantly, and so that's where people tune in to see the action of you as a functioning board. And then when I look at our finance and facilities numbers, it's I know looking at these numbers, it's sort of our hidden gem, and so what can we do to help promote those meetings? Because clearly people are sticking around, and so you guys are giving great information. And so how can we help promote those meetings to get that great information to more people in our community? So one other thing totally unrelated I just wanted to bring up tonight while I had the floor is save the date for everyone in this room for our State of the Schools. It will be January 29th at Middle School West at 7 p.m. And we will obviously start splashing that around in all of our newsletters and social media channels, but just wanted to make sure it got on everybody's agendas here in this room tonight. So any questions on numbers?
Just one comment, people know that they'll get your reports at our board meetings, so they get maybe the abbreviated, summarized version, so,
Don't feel bad, guys.
yeah, that's fine.
I was trying to figure out how you could feed them cookies through the internet.
So,
Not related.
incentive rewards.
That'll be fun.
Not related to your report, but the profile.
Yeah, the quality profile.
I hope everybody in our community takes time to read that, and it was really well put together.
Thank you.
And lots of great information.
And
so.
hats off to Judy, she designed the whole thing. So
I've
it's,
found a lot of positive feedback from
Same.
people.
I had a lot of people stop me and say that they received it and they were excited. I got a lot of texts about it, all very positive.
Yeah, it's been very well received. So thank
and
you.
we're already having conversations about a late winter mailing with Mr. Hetzel to go over some of our finances. So
That's
we'll continue the conversations in people's mailboxes.
And I had 2 people stop me in the neighborhood who do not have children in the district anymore, who really found it valuable to understand what was going on, so.
Yeah, I agree.
Eric, based on your expertise with these numbers, I mean, these numbers are low compared to the number of people in our districts. Not surprising based on amount of information out there and people are really in society picking and choosing what they can tune into or have time for, but how do these numbers feel for you in terms of, as we think about continuing to live stream?
So I'm glad you asked the question because this actually ties into a Central Ohio PIO conversation that happened this week with Central Ohio districts, just asking what other districts are doing in terms of live streaming versus recording versus just audio recording, is it posted, those sorts of questions. And we're in line with most districts around Central Ohio. I think just about every district other than one either live streams or records the entire thing and posts it the next day. And so, to be honest, it's no different for me in terms of technically whether we live stream or post the next day, it's the same thing. So the way I view them is we're here talking about the content anyway, and I think it's just a good resource to have available, quite frankly. Yes, the numbers aren't representative of a large sector of our community, however, they're always there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That information is always available for people to tap into if they have questions or for us to point back to if asked about.
That's good to hear. I like the archival part of it too. And then I also have the mindset of like, even if one person is getting a lot of good information, we don't know how they're spreading that information out to others. So I was just curious to hear your thoughts and what you're hearing around.
Yeah, I think a lot of Central Ohio districts started during COVID, and it's just a process that's maintained. Some don't live stream, they just post the next day. Some don't air public comment during their meetings, they put a hold screen, those sorts of things. But just some different perspectives, but for the most part, most districts are still live streaming or posting their meetings the next day.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Mrs. Reed with Human Resources.
Thank you. Good evening, President Coates, members of the board. It's nice to see you all tonight. One of the things that happened recently in Human Resources that I wanted to talk about is the posting of what we call our anticipated openings. And the purpose of this is that it allows us to get some job postings out really early in the recruiting and hiring season to begin to develop applicant pools for those future live openings that we'll have hopefully around mid-January. So we post those typically around November timeframe, and we do 4 main categories. So we do a general elementary posting, a general middle school posting, a general high school posting, and then an intervention specialist posting for special ed. And so that allows us to kind of have a wide range of applicants who are applying that we can then begin to start vetting and interviewing in anticipation of the openings that are going to be coming soon. So one of the common misconceptions in our hiring process I wanted to talk about tonight, and I hear this frequently, that one of our data points decides whether or not a candidate moves forward in the hiring process, and that is just absolutely untrue. We have lots of data points that we use throughout the process to really hopefully get a holistic view of each of the candidates who are applying for different positions in the district, especially our teaching positions. So research tells us that there are 4 different things that will predict the success of educators.
Make sure your seatbelts are
So those 4 predictors are education, so what level of education they've attained, their experience, so what experience do they have in the field, their fit for the position, and their talent. And each of those things are actually weighed a little bit differently. So if you think about that holistically as being 100%, you'd actually weigh education at about 12.5%, you'd weigh experience at about 12.5%, fit at about 25%, and talent at 50%. And so that's really tricky, right? Because talent is probably the hardest thing that you'd have to assess throughout the process. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the process, and hopefully you'll hear all 4 of those components as we go through. So we really haven't talked much about our actual application. You hear a lot about the end results of our recruiting and hiring, but we haven't really talked about the steps. So we have a pretty robust application system that's online. We use a frontline recruiting and hiring system. And within that system, there are multiple things that the applicants share with us. They're able to upload documents, and primarily those documents will end up being a resume, a cover letter, their transcripts, and if they have earned their licensure, they'll include their licensure. So we can see all of that right off the bat. The online application itself will collect lots of information, basic employee information like name, address, phone number, email. It will also have legal disclosures, so it requires them to tell us whether or not, for example, they've been forced to resign, or they have had some sort of license suspension through the state. So they're legal things that applicants have to let us know about ahead of time. It also obviously lets us know about previous job experience that they might have had. We ask about their student teaching experience, and what degree they have or will have obtained, what licensure areas they'll be able to teach in. And then one of the most important things I think I like to see in the application is referrals. So they are able to both upload letters of reference, and there's a reference form that's built into the system that gets automatically sent to any references that they include in their application, so that we'll get those back and be able to view those as well. So those are really good pieces of information that we're able to see in the online application. A part of Frontline, we also include a video interview. So that's something it's a really nice way for the applicant just to be able to share some more about themselves personally, to introduce them to us so that we get to know them a little better and see how they might be a good fit for the district. And then finally, the last component is a teacher inventory survey. And that survey, it's comprised of 6 different components. It looks at fairness and respect. It looks at concern for student learning. It looks at adaptability, communication and persuasion, planning and organization, and cultural competence. So from that survey, we'll get a summary of that candidate in each of those different areas. Once we've reviewed that whole application, we will then decide whether or not to bring the candidate in for an in-person interview. And that in-person interview is one of the steps where we try to assess talent. So during the interview, there are some components, again, of the process that we're looking at. And this goes back to what research says are the highest indicators of talent itself. Those areas are effective solving of complex problems, expert organizing, easily influencing others, consistently positive outlook, and pushing hard to get things done. So interestingly, in that part of the interview, we're not really digging into deep content. We're just looking at, surface level kind of who are you as a person and who are you going to be as a teacher. There's no pass or fail score. That's another common misconception with that first interview. It essentially gives us a predictive, like a probability of success for each of the candidates. Once we get past that, the next step is our building level interviews, where the candidates can go through an interview with both the administrators and the teams.
Mrs. Reed, do you want us to save questions to the end? Or?
I'm almost done. So
okay.
And then finally, we try to do a really robust check of references. So making sure that we have, if possible, the immediate supervisor for sure, and then others who can speak broadly to the candidate's ability to perform in the job that we are hopefully going to offer them. So again, hopefully you heard many of those different predictors throughout the process. There's not one thing that we use to decide who's going to move forward in any step of the process. We try to look at this holistically and include lots of different data points along the way. So I will happily answer any questions you might have.
You didn't, I thought you had one.
I do
Okay,
have one,
but I always.
So I guess the big thing I've always heard is like the survey that you're talking about is more of like a screener. And when people don't do well enough on that, then we don't bring them in for our first interview. But you were saying that is not the case?
Are you talking about the online screener?
Correct. Like before they even come in for an interview, I've always heard that screener is something that will not like bring somebody.
It is one of the components that we look at for sure. It depends really on the position and how many applicants we have as to how many people we're able to bring in for those in-person interviews. For some of the elementary positions, we might have 120 applicants for one position. So there's no way for us to be able to bring everybody in for an in-person. So it really kind of depends on each individual job and how many applicants we're able to bring through. But it is a part of the decision-making process for sure.
But with it weighted 50%, if that's how so it is really, if you don't measure well in the screener,
You're out.
you're
talking
out.
about, so I think that first we were talking about the application, right? Is that what you're saying, to bring them in for the application, from the application?
Yeah, but part of the initial application is the online screener, correct?
Yes, but I
You
think
have to
you're
get
asking
through.
about
The talent is a
the
50%.
in-person. Are you asking about the in-person?
No, I thought you
interview?
said that of the 4 data points, talent is 50%, and you gain that talent assessment from the screener.
And also the online score as well.
There's 2 different screeners per se.
Yes.
Oh, I only heard one.
Yeah, I
Yes.
only heard one too.
That
Where's
was
the
my,
other?
Because that's the teacher inventory survey.
The what?
The teacher inventory survey.
Is before they come in for an
Correct.
in-person interview,
Yes.
correct? So then is there
That's
another,
what I'm saying.
is there another thing when they come in? Is that what you were saying?
The
In the
in-person
questions that you
interview?
asked? Yeah.
Is a second screener?
Yes.
that's where
correct.
you're assessing the talent.
So how do you divide that 50% between those 2 screeners?
I mean, we don't put a percentage on it. I think it's looked at holistically based on what we saw in the application, maybe what their references were saying, how they performed in the interview, and again, whether or not, excuse me, I think they're gonna be a good fit for the position at the building level. Am I answering the question?
No.
You're not answering it for me because I'm a new numbers person, and so to me,
Let me try.
we've built a rubric, but we're not able to build the map using that rubric.
I guess maybe my bigger question might be, and maybe this helps with your numbers, and maybe it doesn't, because I'm not as good of a number person, and I will admit that. If you're looking at like 120 applicants, you obviously, I would assume you cannot go through everybody's, like, that is a lot, you're talking about one job, 120 people. So I guess what I've heard, and I don't even know that I would say that I've heard this only about Gehanna, but in the world of teaching in general, if you don't make it past the screener, nobody's looking at your application. The online application. Does that make sense? That's what I've and I would not say that only about Gehanna, but that is what I've heard is essentially you're gonna rise based on that screener or you're not to what even is getting looked at. Because for you to look at 60 applications for one job is a lot.
And I
Probably
would say it's not
realistic.
limited to education, it's just the
Yes.
world in which we live now. The screener plays a much more predominant role in whether you can get in for that step. And I think that's the broader
Online
question.
application.
If you have 120 applicants. So if I only
Yes.
have 10,
Yes.
then they're all getting in.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the differentiator, I
Right.
think, is how many people we have and how many people we can reasonably get in for those
Because you have to have a way to
in-person
narrow
interviews.
down.
Yes, yes.
So then that online screener then that we use, is that something that's typical to like other Central Ohio schools? Is that something
Yes.
we've kind of?
Yeah, and it's a part of the frontline application, so
Oh, so it's
anybody who
within
has
frontline
the
system,
frontline
okay.
application has that same
Has the same
survey.
screener.
Can we customize the questions?
We can create our own questions. we can create a separate survey. But in terms of the survey that's built into the application, we can't change those.
And with the concept of equity, is that tool analyzed based on
Research-based,
multicultural ethics?
yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it is?
Yes.
That's good.
On the in-person interview, you talked about like assessing the talent there. Is there a rubric that you use during that
There's
process?
again, it gives us a probability score essentially. So it's like a holistic score that then turns into a percentage. So is that answering?
Yeah, it does, it does.
Okay, and then you didn't say this, but once somebody then moves on to maybe level 3 and they're looking for a teaching position, do we always require that they teach a lesson?
No.
Or, okay, but in
At the
some
building-
cases, do we? That's by building?
Yes.
Is that
At the
by
level
building
they
principal
decide.
then?
I'm sorry?
Is that by building principal then?
Yes. We talked about actually, when was that? We did a PD on this.
Yeah, performance-based tasks.
Was it last summer? Yeah, I think I offered a PD to the principals last summer during our principal PD academy in June on the importance of including performance-based tasks in their interview processes. So some of them are definitely doing that.
And when teachers, and this is a little bit off track now, but not, when teachers apply inter-district, are they asked to do a lesson for a principal sometimes, or is that also building by building?
That would be building by building, at the building level.
So there are some people who ask for that, and some
Yes.
people are okay with it.
Correct.
It's a relatively new practice for us. That's starting to pick up. Even we are starting to include those in like our administrative interviews and things like that.
I guess some of the things I've heard as, I understand the building to building, or I guess what I want to say is what I've heard as teachers, it is frustrating sometimes if you're just inter-districting to be asked to do a lesson. With the idea that you've already been brought into the community, into the family, you're already a part of this. I'm just asking to go to a different building. So there are some, I've heard frustration within that level, especially if you are not being asked to do that in every building. Like, why am I being asked this here when I'm not other places?
Like, get over it.
Yeah. But,
Yeah, and I mean, each principal, works with their teams to create their process, and different teams are looking for different things. And, I do think more performance-based components will be wrapped in, but, every principal and team is just trying to get the best fit for their building. And so even if you're coming from another building in the district, you might come with a different skill set, a different level of knowledge or experience or a style. And so they want to see that from those teachers as well.
Any other questions?
No, that was good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next, Mr. Blackwell with a technology update.
Good evening, President Coates and members of the board. Tonight I have a few updates from the technology department. First, we got some good news today about some language changes to the language that was implemented as part of SB 29.
Oh, good.
So in Senate Bill 8, or actually the Senate and the House have passed House Bill 432, which has something to do with career and technical education, but they added into there some changes to the SB 29 language. And they have clarified that we are not required to send a notice to parents every time that we do a routine tech support or instructional usage of technology in the school. So that's good. That's a big relief for us. They still do have in there that we must send a notice whenever we use data to help a student find a lost device. So that'll still be a little bit of a burden because, as you can imagine, students lose their devices in the school every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
So interesting that that's the data point they chose to.
I know, I'm trying to understand the why behind that.
I don't really understand either. It says lost or missing or stolen or lost or stolen. I can understand wanting to be really careful when there's a theft involved, but I don't know why just losing your device is something that needs to be reported.
Yeah,
But we'll figure out a process for that.
maybe those legislators don't have teenagers.
I'm guessing.
There weren't any major changes to the requirements around the contract language that we now have to include with our technology providers. So we'll still be moving forward with our software vetting process, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. We went through our onboarding with the EdTech Leaders Alliance. That's the consortium that's going to help us create those data processing agreements with our vendors. That'll make us compliant not only with SB 29, but also the check FERPA, cybersecurity, and some other data best practices. So in that onboarding, they showed us how to search for existing agreements in the state, how to sign on to those and adopt them as our own, and also how to use a custom online resource listing. So when we adopt a resource and it goes through our approval process, it'll show up on that online portal where it can be viewed by our staff and community. And we're also able to put custom statuses in there too. So if something was requested and we chose not to adopt it for any reason, we can add that on there as well, which is nice and helpful. So we have a single list that shows almost all of our resources and their approval status.
Yeah.
That's good.
And that DPA process with the consortium is just one component of our overall approval process. And that's something we've been working on with Ms. Holloman. It'll start off with a form that's submitted by a staff member. It'll be checked by the technology department and the curriculum department if it's a curricular resource. We'll go through the legal requirements, and if it's all good, it'll eventually, of course, go through board approval. And we'll be sending out more information on that later this month. We hope to start processing those applications early 2025. Another thing happening early 2025 is freshmen will be getting their replacement Chromebooks on January 6th. Our end user support manager, Gina Carter, has been working with the high school administrators to plan that event. Students will go down to the library in 3 waves during 5th period on that day. That's their homeroom. They will turn in their old Chromebook and receive their new one. These students have had those devices since they started 6th grade. And they'll keep these until they graduate. So it's kind of the perfect time, right? 3.5 years on one and then 3.5 years on another. And with those devices that we collect back from those 9th graders, if they're in very good shape, they might get reused in an elementary classroom cart like that one over there. If they're in medium shape, they might be put in part of our loaner fleet that we pass out to students when their device is in for repair. And then the ones that are in more rough shape will probably become parts or recycling. Another new thing we're trying with our Chromebook selection process for what we'll purchase for our 6th graders next year. We always do a few different things when we're evaluating Chromebook models. We always disassemble them to judge their build quality and kind of see how long and how difficult it is to repair. Like replace the keyboard and screen and so forth, how easy those repairs are. We also check reviews, talk to other districts and see what's out there. And we also get a little bit of feedback from staff and students, but we've never really had much feedback. So this year we're going farther with that, and we're actually passing out the candidate Chromebook models to middle schoolers for real world testing. We started with
That's UX, user experience right there, yeah.
We started with an RFP process and we bought 10 each of 4 different models. And we'll be passing those out to middle schoolers shortly, and then towards the end of the school year, we'll see how they held up, if there are any specific issues with them. And that'll help us make our selection for our purchase next year.
And you're giving this to current 6th graders?
I don't know if we've picked a grade, but it's going to be current middle schoolers.
No, okay. Because I was gonna say, do they have to give their old one back then?
Yeah, we'll be basically trading them this for their current Chromebook, and they'll get to keep the trial Chromebook for most of the rest of the school year. And they'll
I'm
switch
just
back.
thinking, if they're a 7th grader that you're doing this with, and they already have gotten their new Chromebook last year, at the end of the trial, do they have to give back the new technology and get their last year's Chromebook?
Yeah. That's how we
Good
envision
luck with
it.
that.
What's it for kids that want to try?
We find that kids are always happy to try out.
No, they
new
want
device
to
for us.
test scientists.
And the last thing I have is a few help desk statistics. I think I last had a few statistics in August. So this time I just did it by month. I didn't break it down by week. So in September, we had 864 help desk tickets opened, and our average response time was 1.4 days, and average resolution was 5.3 days. So a little bit of a slowdown from August in our response time wise. And my theory on that is in August, you have a lot of people with a lot of the same issues and simple issues. They've forgotten things over the summer, where their new staff member needs some help. We can close those things out pretty quickly, where once we get into the later months, they're more serious problems, right? They take a little bit more time. October, we had 727 tickets, a 1.1 day response time, and a 4.4 day resolution time. Now for November, I don't know what happened here, but we had 572 tickets with a 5.4 hour response time and a 2.3 day resolution time. So something good happened in November.
Good November.
And that's all I have.
Questions for Mr. Black?
That's a verb.
Yeah. Thank you. Next is special education update with Mrs. Waho.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to share a little bit about our November PD Day. On November 8th, all special education certificated staff engaged in learning focused on visually representing student data. We focused on a very systematic way that staff can quickly determine if students are on track to meet their IEP goals or not. This work was identified as a priority during a time when special education administrators and coaches conducted a district-wide progress report study during the 23-24 school year. And what we found is that when a teacher or a related service provider is able to visually represent their data and compare it to anticipated trajectory of progress, they're able to very quickly either maintain their interventions or change them to help the student make better progress. What we also found is that when they don't visually represent their data, they're not always confident in the amount of progress a student is actually making from one period to the next. And so sometimes students are on track to meet their goal by virtue of figuring out if their data is on track, but they don't always meet their goal at the end. So as a result of that study, we took a look at a tool that staff might be able to use to help them determine this process more easily. And we had 4 different vendors come and present to our group options that we might be able to purchase to help our staff track data. And none of them met our needs. So we worked with a consultant to create our own. And it's been a 10-month process, and we're really, really proud of our features that we're able to provide our staff to use as a tool.
Probably sell that tool to other districts once you have this.
We absolutely could. It's very exciting. So we ended up creating a very robust tool which allows our staff to enter student baseline data and progress along the way. And every time they enter an individual data point, the staff immediately know if the student's performance is moving in the right direction or not. It allows the staff to track when the student has an event that may impact their performance, such as a schedule change, a life event, or an intervention change. When the team finds that students are not progressing as expected, they can immediately determine what needs to happen to get the students back on track, versus waiting until the end of the IEP to see if the students met their goal or not. Both during and after that PD day, the staff provided valuable feedback on the tool, and we're now even better making changes to enhance the tool. In February, we look forward to having continued conversations about how the initial implementation has gone, and we are working to ensure that teams have a plan to address when students exceed their goals, what we can do to help them continue to grow, or if a student is not on track, what to do in that situation to help the students get back on track. We're excited that we're going to be able to immediately pivot and respond to students in real time, given this visual representation. We're at the beginning stages, but the tool has been very promising in allowing our staff to quickly identify when students need something different or to continue on the track they're on. So it's great. It's been a great process.
Question. I love that you didn't settle. We're creating our own tool. I mean, that's amazing. That's exactly so much better.
It's like a side gig that we could do.
Seriously.
I mean, can we financially do that and make money out of that? That would be the real question. I do have a couple questions, if you don't mind. Like, do you have a name for this tool?
It's called the PMT.
Okay, and so is it like,
Progress.
I guess I'm kind of imagining it in my mind, so then does it give them like a graph? Is that what
It gives them
something?
a trajectory, it gives them where students should be at every quarter along the way from the beginning of the IEP to the end of the IEP. It allows us to visually track it through color coding. It gives us, if students are on track or off track, how much they need to grow each week between now and the end of the IEP and meet their goal. It's very robust.
And are we using it K-12?
It's pre-K-12.
Okay. And is it something that if we get good at this, we could use it potentially within our tier 2 world and kind of see where they are?
We are asking that we can polish this and make it right before we share it with other departments. Because this staff really can tell us what works and what doesn't. They know data so well. And so we want to make it right before we make it big, and then if we go back and fix everything. Great.
Yeah, I was just thinking it was be an interesting tool to use with that MTSS within tier 2 to kind of see is it actually growing these kids? Is it not? Especially when we look at the type of reading services that we're providing to kids who may or may not be dyslexic. Like, are we being appropriate for within tier 2?
We all, and this isn't the only tool, we have another one within our same goal program, within our IEP program, that it does something similar with not as many features. Or if a teacher has their own, they're able to use their own. Our expectation is that there's visual representation and be able to quickly say to a team or to a parent, to an administrator, here's where my student is and here's where they need to go.
Like a map graph.
What does PMT stand?
Progress monitoring tool.
There you go.
So it assesses the progress
Right
and then does it give recommendations and?
It doesn't give the recommendations, but it gives how much growth a student needs based on the trajectory of growth that's expected and what their personal growth trajectory has been in order to meet their goal at the end of the IEP.
And Sue, just to clarify, the tool itself doesn't actually assess the kids, but once the assessment's done
Once the
for a
data's put in.
particular IEP goal, the teacher enters the data and it creates all this information.
Okay.
So who helped you develop that?
So a former staff member that worked here at the high school named Gade, he no longer works here, but he started with us last January and met with us probably 6 or 7 times in the spring. Met with me a couple times this summer and a couple times this fall, and has polished it all along the way.
That's awesome.
And several other projects for us.
Good. He's a whiz.
Is it something that, oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just thinking, is it something that the kids and the parents look at also, or is this what we're like?
So right now it's team-based, although we have found a way to make a screenshot of the visual graph, which is so easy to see for students that maybe are in the middle of elementary and parents that we can copy and paste into a progress report. There's some formatting issues we're trying to work through, but it's available.
Okay, but ultimately you're saying is that when people see it visually, they essentially respond to it better and therefore to make that connection. Okay.
Versus saying, I think the student's on track, they were able to get 3 out of 4 this time, 4 out of 5 this time, but this puts it exactly where the trend
versus just putting it in the progress report. Okay.
What's else?
When does it get sent out? I know you said what's great about this is that you'll see it before you reach the end of that IEP cycle, because it's a lot of time has gone by at that point. So when does it get sent out? Is it when the goal is completed, or is it a certain?
Progress reports are sent out every time we report.
Oh, so every time with that, okay.
But the teachers will be able to see it every time they enter at least more than one data point. So after the second data point is added, the trend lines are all created and visual representations available.
Wow, very exciting.
It is very exciting.
It's our wheelhouse.
Any other questions? Okay, one quick go back. Mr. Blackwell, I just wanted to thank you for keeping up with all the changes coming down with SB 29 and now 432. You and your team and everyone else that's connected to it. I know it's a lot on top of your daily work, so thank you. All right, with that, do I have a motion to adjourn the December 5th board workshop meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Horn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Horn. Any final discussion? Okay, Mr. Hetzel, can you please call roll?
Mrs. Dimmerly?
Yes.
Mr. Manley?
Yes.
Mrs. Mooring?
Yes.
Mrs. Coates?
Yes.
Mrs. Horn?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. It is 8:14 and we are adjourned.